right, we are live on YouTube, and then I am going to go ahead, or Deborah, are you going to start us recording live
yes,
here as well?
Broadcast in 1 second. I just want to
Great.
make sure I can share. Okay. Awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Carrie Hansen. I am the Vice President of SOCAP, and I am really excited for this conversation that we are having today in partnership with B Lab and the rest of our exciting panel. I'm going to just be really quick here and say that this conversation is a lead in to part of the content we will also be having at SOCAP Virtual, including content that we will continue to pull through with B Lab in October. So if you enjoyed this session, please feel free to join us live at SOCAP October 19th through the 23rd. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just really going to turn it over to Chris Marquise, and he is going to take us through today's conversation. And thank you so much. Chris, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carrie. And I just want to thank also SOCAP as well as B Lab for having this really, I think, very important and also very timely event. So as Carrie mentioned, I'm Chris Marquis. I'm a professor at Cornell. I just wrote a book on the B Corp movement that looks at how we can transform our society, our economy to a much more stakeholder focused one. In today's panel, we have a number of folks that are involved in this change on the ground. So we have Holly Ensign-Barstow from B Lab, Paul Cabot, chairman of the board of trustees of the Hopi Foundation, and Brett Hurt, who is chairman and co-founder of data.world. And so the format today, so I'll say a little bit about stakeholder capitalism, shareholder primacy, and then we'll go through each of our speakers before I ask some questions. And at the very end, we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So please be thinking about what questions you want to ask about any of the topics that we discuss. So this topic of shareholder capitalism, this is something you've been hearing a lot about in the news recently, and it's particularly timely because you might have seen in the media yesterday, the New York Times, Fortune magazine, many major publications, that it was the anniversary of a very well-known essay written in 1970 on how the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, was what this was called. And this is known as ushering in the era of shareholder primacy, where companies' sole obligation was to deliver profit to their shareholders. This ended up becoming encoded in laws. There ended up becoming various processes and policies like, stock options, sort of getting rid of anti-takeover protections that really aligned the interests of the management and companies so solely on the shareholders that many of the other stakeholders in the business, such as employees, communities, the environment, were very neglected. If you look at the trends since that happened, CEO pay went from about 20 to 1 compared to the average worker in firms to about 300 to 1, where it is more recently, the 20 to 1 being around when Milton Friedman wrote his article. Environmental problems we're all familiar with. I think much of this stems from this idea that companies are so focused on just returning money to shareholders that they neglect the environment, pollution, things that they're not actually charged for, they're willing to pass on to society and others. So, many leaders in society, it's not just from, the crazy, wacky socialist left that's saying this, but everyone from both sides of the political spectrum. So everyone from, Marco Rubio wrote a report recently about American competitiveness, where he said that shareholder primacy is, destroying the United States, make it much too short term. We need to focus much more on, employees, consumers. That will lead to innovation. You have Elizabeth Warren, many of the ideas of stakeholder capitalism were embedded in a law that she has proposed, the Accountable Capitalism Act. And most notably was the Business Roundtable, very influential group of the 200 largest CEOs of companies in the United States. And they came out with a statement that said, you know, for the past 20 years, we've been saying the purpose of the company is to deliver value for shareholders. And today we're changing the purpose to be, it's about all stakeholders. So, you know, be it, you know, employees, we need to have better employee benefits, communities, be more active in supporting our community organization, and certainly much more environmentally sustainable and friendly. So where I think, you know, our discussion we'll talk a lot about today is sort of how to do that. It's actually easy to say we're going to become stakeholder driven. It's actually hard to do it. And the book that I wrote on is entitled Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism, really focuses on that and how, you know, through the tools of accountability, tools of governance, that actually the B Corp movement, and you don't have to be a B Corp, you can be more like a B Corp, really enables stakeholder capitalism. And with that short introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Holly Ensign-Barstow from B Lab, who will describe a little bit more about the governance innovations and other accountability innovations that B Lab has introduced. So Holly, over to you.
Thank you. As Chris mentioned, I'm the Director of Stakeholder Governance and Policy at B Lab. Our mission as an organization is to use the power of business to solve social and environmental problems, with the end goal of creating an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system that works for all people on the planet. We're best known for certification, for B Corp certification, which is often just called B Corp in the press. It's akin to organic for milk or fair trade for coffee, except it's comprehensive. So it takes into account all areas of a company's operations and impact, and it's not just an end product certification. There are now over 3,500 certified B corporations operating in 150 different industries and 70 different countries. But back when we launched the certification in 2006, we recognized that current law and norms really force companies to operate with the sole purpose of creating monetary value for their shareholders, essentially shareholder primacy. And if we truly wanted to create an economic system for all people on the planet, we needed to change this. We needed business to think about their stakeholders as well as the entire economic system in which they operate. We essentially needed business to be part of the solution instead of being the problem. So as part of the certification, we require all certified B corporations to adopt a legal commitment to consider their stakeholders in their decision-making process and have a broader purpose to create a material positive impact on society and the environment. We essentially require all certified B corporations to adopt stakeholder governance into their legal DNA. It essentially prioritizes stakeholders on par with shareholders, and it overcomes the norms and the laws that are inherent in shareholder primacy. What we found when we first started creating this legal pathway for the certified B Corp community is that some types of legal entities, this is actually an easy process. You can basically just amend your governing documents and adopt specific legal language, like for LLCs. But for others, current law actually completely prevents this type of commitment. So for corporations in the vast majority of states, this is an impossible feat. It's impossible for you to do. So in order to create a legal pathway to stakeholder governance for corporations, we designed a new legal status, which is called a benefit corporation, and passed that into law in states around the country and now countries around the world. The benefit corporation is essentially a traditional business corporation. It's built on top of the traditional business law, so you enjoy all the same protections and permissions and tax status as a regular corporation. You're just opting in to additional obligations regarding your purpose, your accountability, and transparency. You have a purpose to create material positive impact on society and the environment. You have a changed fiduciary duty. So you have adopted stakeholder governance. Your directors are required to consider the impact of their decisions on their stakeholders. And you're transparent about how you do that to your shareholders and to the broader public. We've been very successful in this effort. We've passed benefit corporations now into 38 different jurisdictions in the US, 4 other countries, and many, very large recognizable brands have adopted it. We truly believe, and I personally find this, it's dear to my heart. I believe that, stakeholder governance forms like the benefit corporation are needed for companies to truly live into a commitment for stakeholders. And that if we want to create an economic system that works for everyone, we need more companies to operate this way, including companies like the BRT.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Holly. So Paul, we'll turn it over to you to learn more about your work at the Hopi Foundation and in Indigenous communities.
All right, thank you. Well, hello everyone. My name is Paul Cabot. I'm the founder, one of the founding members and vice president of Indigenous Collaboration. We're facilitators. We provide a consensus-based process for group decision making, and we work largely in Native American communities on issues that people are struggling with in their communities. I'm also the chairman of the board on the board of trustees for the Hopi Foundation. We are we're a foundation. We're an operating foundation on the Hopi Reservation. Our mission is to support nonprofit entities, but as an operating foundation, we also operate programming under the umbrella of the foundation. It's kind of like an incubator where we might have small startup nonprofit programs that we cultivate, we build capacity, and our ideal goal is to spin them off at some point as standalone 501c3s on their own. I've been asked to kind of share with you a little bit about business and governance in Indian country. I can speak to my own tribes, but in my work with the Indigenous Collaboration and other nonprofit work, I've done a lot of work with communities across the country, and we have a lot of similarities. In general, I think Native communities, we have this historically, we're self-sufficient, community-oriented, and historically, we've had these governing structures and living structures where people have been engaged and involved in all aspects of living within the communities. Everybody participates, everybody contributes, nobody falls through the cracks. And we have these ancient systems in place to maintain our societies. It's kind of hard to imagine that the world we live in today has been largely in Indian country, we've only had this in place for a few decades. I look at things through the perspective of my grandfather, a man I knew in my childhood, and he was in his 70s and 80s when I was growing up as a young man and through my teenage years. He was born in 1900, and he saw in his lifetime pretty much living the way that we have lived in Hopi for millennia, literally, to a completely different way of life where people have cars and houses and pay like utility bills and buy gas and clothing and food at the grocery stores. If you can imagine, Native people weren't even citizens of the United States up until 1924. In the 1930s, the federal government passed an act that enabled Native communities to create governing systems that were recognized by the federal government. In order to have a governing system that was recognized by the federal government, we had to have articles of it, a constitution, basically. And so tribes adopted governing systems based on the United States government, which were largely foreign to the tribes themselves. We had, at that time, probably in the 30s, we had very few people who had education, very few people who were even literate, and yet we were expected to operate in this foreign way of governing. Uh, I was born in the 60s, and it's hard to even wrap my mind around it, but our government was really only 30 years old when I was born. The kinds of decisions that got made were largely influenced by federal government representatives as part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And all of the kinds of things that governments provide for in any locality, anywhere in the United States, local, county, state, federal, uh, it's funded by tax dollars. All the social programs, all the infrastructure, all of the whole public/government sector is funded like that. In Indian country, it's funded by the federal government largely. We've kind of been set up in this dependency role. So we're just now getting into, I say we, in Indian country is just now getting to a place where we're actively exercising governance and putting into place structures and systems that support living in the modern world. We're at a place now where we're starting to have, it's been in the 70s maybe that we started having people coming back into our communities with education. And then now in the 80s and 90s, people with experience in the outside world that are able to put into place and apply best practices in government, governance, infrastructure, business development, all of the kinds of things that need to be in place in a system. In Hopi, we are very remote. We're 60 miles from the nearest city, at the nearest town, really. It's not really a city. The closest big city is Flagstaff, and that's 100 miles away. We still don't have a micro, we still don't have a businesses. We don't have an ecosystem of businesses to support a taxable base and to support an economy. We have, and so we're starting to, so we have that private sector, private/business sector that's just now evolving. We have the governing sector that's just now starting to put into place infrastructure to support that private/business ecosystem. And we do in Hopi have a nonprofit or a nonprofit sector, particularly with the Hopi Foundation, which has been in place for the last 25 years. So all of these things together are moving towards a sustainable system that will allow us to live in the modern world and kind of continue as a sovereign people. We, I guess one thing I wanted to mention is that in this arena of business development, so much of what we do in our communities has been based on values that we have that are part of our culture. And capitalism, this shareholder primacy idea, is one that's so inconsistent with how we live and how we've lived for such a long time. And so trying to think of, as we consider economic development in our communities and bringing business in, how do we do it in a way that's more consistent with who we are as people? And that's such a big, overwhelming consideration to imagine how we can do that. So this idea that, what B Corp has developed and this idea of the benefit corporation model is such an intriguing and exciting avenue, because it does allow so much more for the values that we carry as Indigenous peoples in moving forward and incorporating economic development and governance at that level and moving forward. So
Super.
just
Thank you so much,
thank you,
Paul. And yeah, I'm going to really look forward to digging into a little bit of the model that you guys have put forward, because it is obviously really important for us if we're going to break out of shareholder primacy to look at a variety of different models that can embed the community and values much more deeply. So I'll have some follow-up questions about that. But before, I want to turn it over to Brett Hurt from Data.World, which is a B Corp, one of the leading technology B Corps, and interested to hear more about your B Corp journey, Brett.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Chris and Paul and Holly and everybody tuning in. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm based here in Austin, Texas, and Data.World is my sixth business as an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur. I'm 48. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 24, and it's my first B corporation. I've been really fortunate as an entrepreneur. My prior company, Bazaar Voice, is responsible for, it's a software that powers most of the websites that host customer reviews. So if you've ever shopped on Walmart or Best Buy or the Home Depot and read reviews, it's the software inside that allows those customer reviews to be possible. It's a global company, had $1 billion IPO, and was a real dream come true as an entrepreneur. And that led to my wife and I backing a number of startups, but we ultimately decided to start another company, and here I am with Data.World 5 years into it. We have a huge announcement going out tomorrow that I wish I could talk about, but hopefully you'll stay tuned for that announcement tomorrow. I've been doing press briefings all day on that. And this is the most exciting and ambitious business that I've ever founded. Alongside three incredible co-founders. We're two things as a B corporation. So one side of our business is the world's largest collaborative data community, collaborating on all types of public data. So whether it's cancer data, COVID-19 data, poverty data, nutrition data, you can probably find it on Data.World. It's used by many universities worldwide. It's used by many companies. Around 2/3 of the Fortune 500 are members of the community. It's used by lots of foundations and governments. All of data.gov here in the US is on Data.World. That's basically the canonical set of public data that the US government puts out, including US Census data. A lot of congressional offices right now are on Data.World analyzing US Census data for various analyses that they're putting together around the election and whatnot. It also, on the other side of the business, is taking that technology and applying it inside of corporations. So these are Fortune 500 type of companies where data is very siloed. And they have the same problem that we all do in society when it comes to collaborating on data, except it's inside of their walls. And that's that their data is buried in all types of silos, whether it's their spreadsheets or their data lakes or data warehouses or their software as a service solutions like Salesforce.com. And Data.World brings that all together so that they can be much more operationally efficient, much better at identifying opportunities, and therefore just a more effective business overall. And our growth has been accelerating during this pandemic because not just data are siloed, but also people are siloed now. So many people are working from home, and you can't just go down the hall and ask those questions. I've been on a long time journey as a conscious capitalist. I used to serve on the board of the Conscious Capitalism organization. I was asked to do that by John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, and really enjoyed that experience. As I mentioned, this is my first B corporation, and it wasn't until I got involved in the Aspen Institute and the Henry Crown Fellowship that I ultimately was exposed to B corporations and what that's all about. And Jay Cohen Gilbert, who's the founder of B Lab, was the person that I met who really educated me on it and made me a huge convert into it. It's really like has all the benefits of a C corporation with all the additional benefits that Holly mentioned. And we're pretty rare in being a technology company and pioneering with that new corporate form. Believe it or not, even though technology companies are all about, quote unquote, disruption, they actually really follow a set pattern where they all become Delaware C corporations and get VC backing and kind of follow this template. And anytime you try to do anything different in business, people look at you like, uh-oh, they're going off the rails. But I think that it's a much more evolved way of being as a company, a much better way of being. I think you can still have just as good a financial metrics as a B corporation as you can with a C. And it's really changed the way that everybody in our company approaches the business, how our partners approach the business, the conversations we have at a board of directors level. We really care about our public mission. Our public mission is codified in our charter. And if we ever want to change that, we have to get our shareholders to vote on that. So it creates this level of soulfulness inside the company, which is very unique and something I really cherish. So this is a very exciting business, and I love the fact that we started in that way. I honestly thought it was going to be a mild benefit, which I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit to you, but it's turned out to be a massive benefit. And my prior company was rated the #1 place to work in Austin when it was small, then medium, then large. It was a great culture, did a lot of good for society, had a great foundation at its core, the Bizarre Voice Foundation, which helped a lot of nonprofits, and had a great outcome. But this is a way to embed the soul in the company very strongly from the beginning, codified in the legal charter of the company. And it just really transforms the way people approach us and the type of dialogue we have when it comes to fulfilling our mission. We publicly report on our mission. I'll share a link in the chat here. We report on that to our shareholders as we're required to do, but we actually report on it publicly as well, because we just decided that shouldn't just be for our shareholders. We should tell everybody that's benefiting from Data.World what we stand for. So it's a real honor to be here with you today via Zoom. And I know this isn't the same as being in person, but at least we're kind of metaphorically in each other's houses here and getting to visit with Paul and Chris and Holly.
Great, thanks so much, Brett. And it's great to hear about your journey and your role as a technology company and a B Corp. And like you mentioned, that is you're relatively rare, particularly one your size. And I do hope that there's other folks from the technology firms on the call that they'll also consider becoming a B Corp. So I'm going to ask our participants some questions now, our panelists some questions, and then we'll be opening it up for questions from everyone. So, if you're a participant, please think about what questions you have, enter them in the Q&A feature, and we'll sort of assemble them as they come in, and then we'll ask them at the last 15 to 20 minutes. So first question, I'd like to start with Holly. I'll just sort of go in the order which we presented. So Holly, it's great to hear about all the work that you and B Lab has done on getting laws changed. I mean, 38 jurisdictions, 4 countries, other countries outside the US, sort of really amazing. I'm curious though, how investors are embracing this model. If you think about moving from a shareholder focused, which investors are the shareholders, to stakeholder focused, I can imagine there might be some, resistance there. How has that gone?
Well, you're not alone in looking to investors as knowing that we need to change their mindset as well to ensure that benefit corporations can be successful. We actually pivoted my department, which used to be focused specifically on passing benefit corporation legislation around the country and the world to focus less on kind of proactive legislative pushes and more on kind of smoothing that path to scale for benefit corporations. Our goal was to ensure that an entrepreneur like Brett could found their company as a benefit corporation and then go out and scale, raise money and exit either through an IPO or an acquisition and not actually experience any roadblocks because of their legal status as a benefit corporation. So we've spent a lot of time educating the market ecosystem, talking to influencers, regulators, lawyers, investors in both the public and the private markets. I actually spent quite a bit of time walking up and down or driving up and down Sand Hill Road, where the who's who of the VC world is located. And what we've seen is a real transition, a real transformation in the past few years. We now have benefit corporations that have done huge capital raises. Lemonade is a great example of this. They raised over $480 million. I think 300 million of that was from SoftBank alone. We've seen benefit corporations that have reached unicorn status. Allbirds is a great example of that. And we've seen lots and lots of VC investors that now have benefit corps in their portfolio. From Benchmark to Sequoia to Andreessen Horowitz to First Round Capital, I could name it off, and you can actually see all of these investors on data.world because we track this information publicly. So I'll just put in a little plug there for Brett. And it's been incredible to watch this switch over the past few years, but it's really in the public markets where it's gotten really, really interesting in just the last 6 months. Prior to 2020, we had only had one benefit corporation IPO. That was Laureate Education back in 2017. But in the first few months of 2020, we've had two incredibly successful IPOs, Lemonade and Vital Farms, both IPO'd. Lemonade was noted as the most successful IPO of 2020 to date. In addition, we saw Amalgamated Bank, a publicly traded bank, adopt stakeholder governance. Which required a vote of their public shareholders. They got, 99% of their shareholders to vote in favor, including BlackRock, and they had their proxy advisors recommend in favor of the vote. Following Amalgamated's leadership, Danone, the giant French dairy company, adopted stakeholder governance in a similar entity to a benefit corporation, but in France. And they also had overwhelming support from their shareholders and their proxy advisors vote in favor or recommend in favor. And just this month, we saw that City First Bank, which is a benefit corporation and a certified B corporation, announced that they're going to merge with Broadway Federal, which is a publicly traded bank. And the resulting entity will be both publicly traded, and they would like to make it a benefit corporation. So that will require a public vote of their shareholders as well. I would say that this is really becoming mainstream. I'm hoping that all of this amazing progress that we've had over the past 6 months can really help encourage the rest of the economy to follow, and particularly people like the Business Roundtable, who have giant impacts on all of the stakeholders and all of the country. And if they were to follow the leadership of these companies, it would be hugely impactful.
Excuse me 1 second. Sorry about that, an ill-timed cough. Well, thank you so much, Holly. I mean, I think, those examples are so compelling, everything from small startups, leading VC firms, $30 billion companies like Danone. People are really jumping aboard this stakeholder governance, stakeholder capitalism train. So really appreciate you highlighting all of those items. Paul, I'm really interested in digging in a little bit with what you were talking about some of your incubation projects. I think, as you mentioned, not being steeped in shareholder capitalism or shareholder primacy, the sort of native peoples and your indigenous collective, that you can sort of design things in a much more sort of thoughtful and community-based way. And you mentioned both the Hopi Foundation and Indigenous Collaboration both have programs where you incubate organizations frequently spun out as 501c3 C3s, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you go about that process, involve stakeholders in that process, and then maybe an example or two of the 501c3s that have come out of it.
So what we do with Indigenous Collaboration, we're a for-profit company. I think I would consider us social entrepreneurs. We work with communities on whatever decision making, whatever they're struggling with, and and in Indian country it covers the gamut. So we'll come into a community, we'll work with the tribal leadership, the governance, the tribal council or government or senate, whatever they have there. Or we might work with a nonprofit that's based in that community, or we might work with a community group that's there, or maybe we'll work with a foundation or an external nonprofit entity that's doing work in that community and engaging that community. So many of the things that are happening in Indian country, like our governments that I was talking about, are attempts to adapt and make something happen, largely based on examples that are outside of our community. They're not there. We think that the best way to do something is to look at how other people are doing it out in the world. Our philosophy and our belief is that and to that end, oftentimes communities will hire outside consultants to come in and say, what's the best way to come in and solve this problem? And they'll make recommendations, and largely, many times, they don't go anywhere, the recommendations that come from the outside. Our philosophy and our belief is that the people who are best poised to solve the problems that they're grappling with are from the community themselves. They know their people, they know their capabilities, they know their history, they know their values. And a lot of times the solutions that get created are innovative, out-of-the-box solutions that nobody ever imagined individually coming into the situation, but collaboratively, people might come up with something completely brand new and different. So we do a lot of energy planning. Strategic planning is one of the arenas that we do a lot of work in. And the Department of Energy, the Federal Department of Energy has does a lot of work specifically, has a budget and works specifically in Native American communities on energy development. This is working with communities to cultivate, to enable and allow the communities to consider what's the best energy plan moving forward for our community. Some communities have natural resources that they might consider cultivating. Some communities, it's all about just conservation and best utilization of their own energy resources for their community. So this is the work that we get hired by the Department of Energy to go into communities and help these communities work on strategic plans. I think one of the most innovative plans that we may have worked with in that arena was with the small tribe in New Mexico, the Picaris Pueblo. And they developed an energy plan and followed through with it, where they, and when they got done, they built a gymnasium and they built a firehouse, and they were the very first net zero commercial buildings in the entire state of New Mexico. It was a very big deal. And this was all based on, and they're a very traditional little community. And it was done in a way that was, and it was done their way, what they needed based on their little community. And they did it themselves. The Hopi Foundation, the work we have done in this incubation status, currently we have 7 different programs that have evolved within the organization. in the Hopi Foundation, new programs that develop they're not developed by staff in the Hopi Foundation. They're driven by grassroots initiatives within the community where we say, we need this, we need this, we need this. One of the biggest programs we have going right now is a traditional agriculture program. Hopi are agricultural people in the middle of the desert without a river nearby for at least 70 miles. We have cultivated and developed strains of crops that are naturally drought resistant and highly nutritious. We have some of we have corn plants that one of 3 strains of corn plants in the entire world that are drought resistant naturally. And it's so important to that particular thing. Hopi agriculture has sustained us for thousands of years. We have lived in the same place right now in Hopi for at least over 1,200 years. So everything about our culture is influenced by agriculture. The way the metaphors we use in our language and the everything about who we are, our values, so much of what we say, even the Hopi Foundation, our mission statement in Hopi is Lo masamit nang latuk sio mani, which means all of us coming together in a good way and cultivating that thing that the metaphor is planting, cultivating that we've planted so that it grows and blossoms and bears fruit. That's such a powerful metaphor in Hopi. So that's a good example of one.
Super.
We've also spun one off recently, which was a nonprofit that was put in place to aid victims of torture, and this is beyond Hopi. This is a worldwide nonprofit organization that because in Hopi we think worldly. And and we also give out a recognition and an award, an international award, to people who are doing work in that arena of addressing victims of torture. And we up until a few years ago, we were the only ones in the world who were giving out an award like that. Now there's another organization in Sweden or Denmark that's doing similar recognition, but those are a couple of examples.
Yeah, super. Thank you for sharing those, Paul. Great. Well, love to ask you a question, Brett, about your experience both as an entrepreneur, VC-funded entrepreneur, as well as someone who invests a lot in companies yourself as an angel and VC investor. So this idea of mission, social governance, can you describe how that comes up in the investment process? How you, as an investor, see that? Any sort of pros, cons, and then also for yourself as an experience as an entrepreneur with Data.World as a B Corp and having benefit corporation structure, what investors say to you about that?
Sure. So I had a long walk with John Mackey at the beginning of Data.World, where he had become an investor, one of our larger investors, and I always looked up to Whole Foods and the way they've done things, the way they've treated their employees, the way they've benefited people through the Whole Planet Foundation. And he was really critical initially of us converting into a B corporation. I left out the part of the story that we actually started as a C corporation, and it was because I didn't know about the B corporation movement, and then quickly got educated on that, and we converted about 6 months into it. So we've been a B corporation for most of our life, but I wanted to get 100% of our shareholders to approve it. And the point he made to me is like, why do you need to make this extra step? Like can't you be a sole full corporation like Whole Foods has been? And I said, well, can you give me a reason why I shouldn't be? And we had this great discussion about that. because I was very motivated to make the decision. I had done a lot of homework, and I gave him the different points, and he ultimately agreed with me. He's like, "You're right. Like, there could only be an upside here." And recently, John has started a new company, and I was on a panel with him at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, and he said, "If I start another company, I'll do it as a B corporation." That was the turn. And we communicate obsessively to our investors every week without fail. Every week we send out an update of how everything's going in the business. We've sent this out since the beginning of the company. I sent out issue number 233. I always number them last week, and I'll send out 234 tonight. And it's just had this really big benefit. And the cool thing about being a tech company is that benefits radiated out in Austin. So in a couple of ways. One is freshman representative Gina Hinojosa in the Texas House asked us to testify about why the Texas government should pass B corporation law, public benefit corporation law, and it passed. Now we were one of three to testify, but I'm from Austin. I was born and raised here, and I never thought that I would be a part of like helping pioneer a new form of corporation in Texas. So that was interesting. The other thing is that, we are investors in a lot of startups, and Dated Out World is seen as one of the stars in the Austin tech economy. And that's radiated out in terms of other entrepreneurs asking, well, why did we start this way? And what are the downsides? And when I answer those questions, more often than not, they actually decide to either found or convert into a B corporation. So there's been a number of companies in Austin. One of them, Holly talked about unicorns, is about to become a unicorn. And they converted into a B corporation early on in their history as a result of that conversation. So that's really cool, like ripples in the pond. The only downside that I can think of is a downside of being different. The world tries to conform you around sameness. And, we all have this herd mentality. It comes from the days when we literally, we're all tribes, and it was dangerous to do anything different from the herd. I've got kids, you can see them on my back wall here. Now they're 16 and 11, and I watch a lot of kids films, so I talk about kid film analogies. But if you've ever seen the movie The Croods, which is about, cavemen, and it's a really funny cartoon movie, it's kind of like The Croods. Like in The Croods, there was this one enterprising daughter who always wanted to venture out, and he's like, no, if you do that, you're gonna kill us all. Like, we're gonna get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. And eventually she's the one that kind of discovers fire and brings them out of the darkness and into innovation. And it's kind of like that in the corporate world. Like if you're, or with really anything in society. I started programming when I was 7 years old. I was picked on a lot for being different, like for doing something different from the rest of the kids in Texas, not playing football and the like. And it's the same way with companies. You do something different and people are going to say, uh-oh, making a mistake. You should do it the way the herd's always done it. And the reality is that different can be a lot better. So I love when I get that question. Someone asks me, well, why did you do something different? And then I can talk. They're basically giving me the license to talk about why we really care, how that's benefited our business. And it's completely changed, the way, again, that governments have partnered with us, universities have partnered with us, foundations have partnered with us. And it's deep, it's legal, it's deep in our DNA. It's not just, some kind of, polish. I mean, it's a very real thing for us. It's part of the soul of our company. So many times when people join us, the number one reason they say they joined us outside of the culture is because we're a B corporation. That's had a huge benefit in that way. But a lot of times when we win new business, our customers will say, a huge thing that pushed you over the edge versus your competition is that you're a B corporation. I love your values. People want to do business with people that care, that have good values, that really have their best interest at heart. And this is the way we're wired as human beings. I mean, we're wired to be very social beings. We're wired to hopefully help and lift each other up. That is the nature of humanity. When Walter Isaacson was retiring from the Aspen Institute, his last talk, he said, out of all of these famous leaders that I've studied and biographied, you know, from Steve Jobs to Benjamin Franklin to Leonardo da Vinci, he says, the number one thing that I've learned is that they were phenomenal collaborators. And that in fact is the basis of human progress, is that we are phenomenal collaborators. We try to do the best to lift each other up and build innovative processes together. Well, I would actually say that the B Corporation movement goes with the grain of human society. And the old way that we did corporations, we've been having a chat here about two documentaries, The Corporation and Chris suggested as well, Fishing with Dynamite, which I'm going to watch. I haven't seen that yet. That came out last year. The old way of doing business actually goes against our human nature. It's actually anti-human nature. Like the B Corporation movement is pro-human nature, pro-collaboration, pro-lifting each other up, that this is the way that we were meant to be. And, you know, we evolve on many different fronts, whether it's, you know, what's happening right now with race and fighting for equality, or what happened recently with you know, marriage and, you know, same-sex marriage, and that being something that's now become legal and recognized. That we are on this arc to evolve, to really lift each other up. And that includes business, and our children are paying attention. You know, my children are paying attention. They were the first investors in Data.World. I actually have right here a photo of our daughter when she first invested in the company. She put $260 in, which was a lot of money for a 10-year-old. And she, you know, she's watching me. And they're watching us, you know, destroy the planet. And they're watching us, you know, just really, you know, ravage the environment. And, you know, there has to be a better way. And the good news is, you know, as Chris said and Holly said, you know, 2019 was a seminal year. You know, you had Larry Fink start the year with saying all stakeholders matter in his annual letter. And Larry Fink is, the CEO of BlackRock and manages more money in the world than any other. I mean, obviously him and his team at BlackRock, it's over 7 trillion in assets. Then you had the Business Roundtable come out with their statement. And you had Larry Fink start off this year with his memo focused on climate change. Well, that's so like yesterday, right? That was in January. We're in the middle of a pandemic, or really at the beginning, sadly, of a pandemic. So, you know, that, like, people forget that he came out with that memo. And that was actually what directly led to Jeff Bezos donating $10 billion for climate change. And so I think that, you know, we're on an evolutionary journey, including in the corporate form, including as entrepreneurs. This is my 6th business. I wish I could say that I found this earlier and that all my businesses have been this way. And it has a huge impact. So, you know, don't underestimate the actions that you can take, not just for your customers and your employees and what you're doing for society, but the impact that has on others that are watching you, whether it's your children or whether it's other entrepreneurs, or whether it's, you know, Paul, in your case, other, you know, Indigenous, you know, people are looking at the way that, that you guys have set things up and getting inspired from you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Brett, for that. From everything from, you know, John Mackey to your kids as investors. That's quite an interesting set of set of folks that are holding you accountable. We only have 5 minutes left, so, you know, we don't have a lot of time for the individual questions from the audience. But there's one, I think, really nice question that I'd like to actually ask all of you to spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes reflecting on. It's from the participant Vina Harbaugh. And she notes that she's inspired by Paul's share on Hopi metaphors grounded in agriculture. All of you are planting seeds for an economy that prioritizes stakeholders. What is the fruit or harvest you most want to see? And I know that's a big question, but if you could answer it in about a minute, that would be great. Holly, let's start with you.
I think, I mean, for me, it's clear that we need to rethink the way our entire system works, or business is really going to lose its license to operate. I think that the public is really, at this moment in time, incredibly open to new and different ideas regarding policy change. And I'm very hopeful that we can move in a direction where we can really achieve kind of broad economic systems change. We have leaders from both parties that are really open to this. And so I'm hopeful that we can really look at the system as a whole and think about the ways that we can align not just, company fiduciary duty, but all of the rules that govern our financial system and the public and the private markets with stakeholders.
Yeah, one of the things I've clearly learned through my study of this is that the law is really the foundation. And I think that, what you're saying is, if we can really transform that, it will have a huge impact through the rest of society and corporations. So thank you very much. Paul, what 1 minute or so on the fruit or harvest you most want to see?
Economic development in Indian country, where deserts in a lot of ways, but economic development is something we absolutely need. We need that ecosystem. And there's some exceptions. There's over 500 federally recognized tribes, and there's some tribes that are doing great. But unlike every other place in this country where we might be considering looking at a corporate model to a new B Corp model of doing business in much of Indian country, we're just developing economies from scratch. We don't have them in place.
Right.
So great opportunity to do something right off the bat.
Great. Well, thank you. I learned a lot, both about sort of ways of potentially developing it, but also, how, not actually being shackled to the shareholder primacy model, hopefully will give you a lot of opportunities in how you operate. And so I hope that there's more engagement in the B Corp community with the indigenous communities as well. So thank you. So Brett, you're our sort of cleanup hitter here. So what fruit or harvest do you most want to see?
Well, I actually, it's in the chat. Carrie shared it, but I would love to see a big tech company like Facebook actually convert into a B corporation. I think for Facebook, it would be one of the most brilliant moves they could possibly make right now. It would hold them to a different level of accountability that they have, and Mark Zuckerberg could actually make that move. We'll do our best to continue to create a really big impact in society and an outcome that gets noticed at data.world to create those ripple effects. But there's some of these, mega tech companies, these top 5 tech companies, which are really tightly held, which could make this move, and the ripple effects that would send throughout tech, which is, under siege, for some good reasons, would just be massive. And I would love to see that. So I'll keep fighting for that. If anybody's interested, read that article that I co-wrote alongside the brilliant Ann Florini in Techonomy magazine about Facebook. But help me get the word out on that. Hopefully Mark Zuckerberg will pay attention to that. But that would be just a massive, massive accelerant to the movement. It is a huge deal, by the way, that Lemonade went public. I think they're worth right now almost $4 billion. So that's a massive happening in tech, in the B corporation space, and there will be a lot more of that. I will tell you that one of the most historic, legendary Silicon Valley investors, a huge reason that he decided to invest in us is because of the fact that we're a B corporation. He said, I really think this is going to be the norm 10 to 15 years from now, and I want to be at the beginning of that trend. And his sons managed the family office with him, and that had that kind of impact. Like, his sons are directly watching like what he does, and he was the initial investor in Facebook. which is interesting,
Wow.
right? Because I had written that
Yeah,
that
so-
op-ed in Techonomy a long time ago, or not a long time ago, but months ago.
Yeah, I love that article, and I hope you can give it to him to pass along to Mark Zuckerberg, because I do agree with you, that would be game changing, and like you're saying, given this corporate structure, it's something that could actually happen. Not
it'd
having
be
to go through a big
accelerator.
shareholder vote.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's going to
Well,
happen. I would just like to see it happen faster.
yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone involved in this, from the organizers at B Lab and SOCAP, for our amazing panelists, Holly, Paul, and Brett. Thank you so much for sharing all of your sort of thoughts and expertise and insights on this important change that the world has to make. We really need to become much more stakeholder driven and put the shareholder primacy behind us. So with that, I'll close and just say thank you all the participants also for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank
Paul,
you.
Holly.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay. Bye-bye.